Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is 21st century terrorists believe in friends and family. There's a debate as to what motivates terrorists. Some say that it's poverty. Some say the opposite. French economist Thomas Piketty just published an essay in Le Monde suggesting that poverty is the motivating force behind terrorists. Piketty is wrong, dead wrong. Modern terrorists are neither warped nor psychotic. They have not been broken, and they are not possessed. They are not to be pitied. They do not come from broken homes and dysfunctional environments. These terrorists are highly motivated and driven by a cause. They have thought things through, and their assessment is that the best way to attack us in the West, and the best way to get our attention, and the best way to also get new recruits and redeem the honor of the Islamic cause, to protect Islam, is through terror. After 9/11, Princeton economist Alan Kruger published a very insightful study of terrorists that came up with the results of the following, the complete opposite of Piketty's study. Kruger concluded that terrorists tend to be wealthier and better educated than their social peers. This was the case across the board. Kruger, by the way, was the chairman of the President's Council, President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. He concludes in the following way. Members of Hezbollah in the 1980s and 90s were better educated and wealthier than the rest of the people in the region. Palestinian terrorists in the 1980s through 2002 were half as likely to be poor than the rest of their community, he says. Even Israeli Jewish terrorists in the 1980s were better educated and wealthier than the average Israeli. Kruger is correct. Look at the facts. The 9/11 bombers were from good families and were highly educated. In Israel, some Palestinian terrorists were law students. I remember one suicide bomber was an elementary school teacher. There have been several cases of female terrorists who were EMTs. That question begs asking, how could an EMT, someone who dedicates her life to saving people, decide to strap a bomb and blow up innocent civilians in a cafe or diner? In the case of one of these female EMTs, she went into a diner at the foot of the Carmel Mountain on the beautiful beachfront below Haifa and committed her terrorist act. She was not the only female suicide bomber. Another female EMT blew herself up in Jerusalem. Actually, there is a significant list. Our U.S. experts are wrong. They know little about the issues and the history, and they assume so much and make conclusions. The worst part of it is that their conclusions are based on Western Christian values and priorities. They conclude based on Western decision-making. But all of us know better, certainly better than the experts. Here's a perfect example. All of us remember and even quote the example of mothers of suicide bombers, exclaiming their love for their children and their wish that all of their children would become shahidin, martyrs for the cause, suicide bombers, mothers who, while sitting in the mourning tent, announce that they will have more children so that they too can join the cause. We ask, how is this possible? How can a mother want their child to die? We don't understand and know that that is it. But so too with this mother, Faustine Malik, the female terrorist in San Bernardino, who embarked on certain death knowing that she was leaving her child forever. Kruger continued his study, and by 2007, he had collected 313 terrorist profiles. And from them, he discovered that the wealthier the country, the more terrorists they produced. He wrote, quote, that countries with a higher GDP per capita were actually more likely to have their citizens involved in the insurgency than were poorer countries. The Paris attack proves that point. The more we learn about the terrorists who attacked in Paris, the more support we have for the wealthy terrorist hypothesis. Two of the terrorists owned a successful bar. The mastermind's family owned a clothing store in Belgium. These ISIS terrorists came from middle-class or better families. Figuring out the motivation of terrorists is not an easy thing. It's not as simply as saying poor souls, or if they were only better educated or had more money, they would not have chosen that life/death. Not at all that easy, and certainly not correct. A different study, one that came out just recently, was conducted by Scott Atran, the co-founder of the Center for the Resolution of Intractable Conflict at Oxford University. It revealed some very interesting information about the study of ISIS recruits. While the study admitted that mosques had become radicalized, it also claimed that ISIS recruitment very seldom comes from within the mosques. In fact, the study found that 75% of all ISIS recruits were recruited by friends. It also found that 20% of ISIS recruits were recruited by family. That means by siblings and cousins. Once again, pay attention to the lineage of the Paris bombers and the Charlie Hebdo terror groups, and you'll see how true that is. Anecdotal evidence seems to confirm Atran's research and his assertions. We see many cells which include friends from the same neighborhood. These are the friendships that date back decades. When looking at those who perpetrate terror attacks, we see an uncanny number of siblings and cousins. That means that radicalized mosques are not the hotbed of recruitment that we may have thought, and hardcore recruiters are less effective than we have given them credit for. Contacts and connections are most effective for recruitment. This knowledge should allow us in the Western world another set of methods to use to interrupt recruitment. Friends and family, we have to find them. So what is it that motivates the terrorists? Terrorists are motivated by a cause. They believe that murdering others and killing themselves is the most effective way to defend that cause. The cause for these terrorists is radical Islam, and it comes wrapped in the cloak of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And they believe in the friends and family plan. Rich or poor, educated or uneducated, 21st century terrorists like to carry out their deadly acts together with people they know best and trust the most, their family and friends. Saeed Farouk's father gave an interview to the Italian media outlet La Stampa. He told them exactly this. He said how polite Saeed was and what a good man he was. The father gave insight into the advice that he gave his son. The father's words of wisdom were, in his own eyes, supposed to calm his son and to assure us that Saeed Farouk was not the murderous terrorist. The father said that Farouk supported ISIS and its leader, Baghdadi. He particularly was pleased with the role that ISIS had as it stands to confront Israel. This is what the father said about his son, the terrorist. I always told him, remain calm, be patient. Israel won't exist in another 2 years. The geopolitical situation is changing. Russia, China, even the US, no one wants the Jews there anymore. They'll send them back to Ukraine, unquote. These ideas are coming from Farouk's father, and they are hardly moderate. One can only imagine how extreme the son's ideas and actions were if this is considered moderate thinking. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column by Jessica Stern. Jessica is out of Boston. She used to be at Harvard, and now she's at Boston University. Jessica Stern is a professor at Boston University's Pardee School of Global Studies. She's the co-author, most recently, of ISIS, the State of Terror. We've been on TV together numerous times, on network TV and on cable shows. Either we follow one another, or we're together as part of a panel. Jessica is smart and clear. She's a clear thinker. This column comes from the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times. It was published on December 6th, 2015, in what today is called the Sunday Review. It used to be called the Week in Review, but the Times had a makeover, and they changed the name and the layout. I do not particularly enjoy the layout and the style, so as a rebellious response, I still refer to the section as the Week in Review. This piece is called how terror hardens us. Stern begins by explaining that horror is all around us, and we're becoming insensitive to it, or better, bewildered by it. She writes, "We Americans are living through a dread-inducing age of school shootings, suicide bombers, of racist terror and mass murder, of enemies who broadcast terrifying pronouncements against us. We are not used to living with such bewildering uncertainty. Civilians are not collateral damage in this seemingly endless war. They are the preferred target." Jessica Stern then explains that we feel vulnerable and that terror can strike anywhere, anytime. This is how Jessica Stern puts it. "We feel vulnerable in many different places. Where we used to feel safe, in cafes or at concerts, at sporting events, at home or at work, the killers are not just those coming in from abroad, but they are already here. Some even born here, seemingly ready to strike at any moment. The latest attack in San Bernardino, California, which came 5 days after a mass shooting in Colorado, only reinforces this feeling of vulnerability." And then Stern says, "We do not even know what to call this act. What does it matter?" That's what she asks. What does it matter? She writes, "In the immediate aftermath, we didn't know what to label it, terrorism or workplace violence. What really concerns us is not so much what to call the crime, but whether the ideology of the killers is shared by others, suggesting there may be more such attacks to come, and how we will respond going forward." Jessica Stern is correct. Indeed, we are all searching for answers. She gets personal and observes the following. "In many years of studying this subject, I have come to understand that a mass shooting or terrorist attack evokes a powerful sense of dread. It is a form of psychological warfare whose goal is to bolster the morale of its supporters and demoralize and frighten its target audience, the victims and their communities. Terrorists aim to make us feel afraid and to overreact in fear. The good news is that when people are reminded of what they value most, such as the divine, before being reminded of their inevitable death, the negative impact is reduced. And when people are reminded of values such as tolerance or their commitment to individual rights, their awareness of mortality increases these commitments." In a warped way, she says the terrorists and their brutality actually makes us more humane and more aware. She concludes powerfully by saying, "If we are to prevail in the war on terrorism, we need to remember that the freedoms we aspire to come with great responsibilities. And these responsibilities involve not just fighting terrorists, but also managing our own terror." Jessica Stern's column is a beautiful piece, probably better suited to a philosopher or a theologian than a terror expert, but the ideas are welcome. Second up is an editorial from the New York Times. Both of our pieces today are from the New York Times. It makes sense. The New York Times is still the paper of record. Many viewers refuse to read the Times on principle. I understand your point of view. But leaders and people like myself must read the New York Times. It is essential to see how they see things, how they report. Obviously, I often disagree with the Times coverage of Israel. I disagree with their editorial policy in many cases and their point of view on many issues. This editorial was published on Monday, December 7th, 2015. It's entitled, "Mr. Obama's Tough, Calming Talk." The editorial is based on an Oval Office live address to the nation about terror. This was only the third time that Obama delivered such a speech in his 7 years as president. The speech was 13 minutes long. Obama's speech had two distinct parts. One was about terror, and the second was about maintaining the character of America and not giving in to hatred, especially hatred of Muslims. The Times begins the editorial in the following way. During his Oval Office address on Sunday night, President Obama sought to reassure Americans that his administration's expanding campaign against the Islamic State will succeed in reducing threats of terrorism, and he warned against the wholesale vilification of Muslims. The editorial paraphrases President Obama's plan to fight terror and says, "The speech signaled how worried the White House has become about the trajectory the war against the Islamic State or ISIS could take if a sense of widespread panic, turbocharged by election year politics, started shaping domestic and foreign policy. While he didn't unveil new initiatives, Mr. Obama called on Americans to reject the impulse to take actions based on fear. Even in this political season, even as we properly debate what steps I and future presidents must take to keep our country safe, let's make sure we never forget what makes us exceptional, he said. Let's not forget that freedom is more powerful than fear. The editorial quotes extensively from the presentation. It ends with President Obama making a plea to the country for unity. But first, the Times has to attack the Republicans and the presidential candidates. Mr. Obama is right to caution against the risk of further alienating Muslims in the United States and around the world. The Islamic State has ably exploited the sense of isolation many Muslims feel, and stoking hatred towards Muslims would only play into the group's hands. Several Republican presidential candidates and many governors are doing just that by portraying Muslims as inherently dangerous and endorsing draconian policies. We cannot turn against one another by letting this war be defined as a war between America and Islam, Mr. Obama said. Muslim Americans are our friends and our neighbors, our co-workers, our sports heroes, and yes, they are our men and women in uniform who are willing to die in defense of our country. I think that President Obama spoke very well. He referred to the events in California as terror. This is a huge step forward for him, but he really did not suggest anything new, nothing new at all, and that's sad. The president has constantly downplayed terror, especially Islamic terror in the United States. Honestly, he does not see it as a true threat. He sees Islamic terror and terrorists as losers, as unsophisticated, even in their weapons and their modus operandi, their MO. That is why Obama just does not get it on the issue of terror. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. All the cartoons today are from the Tribune Content Services. The Tribune is one of the largest syndication services for print and electronic media. Most were published on Monday, December 7th, 2015. All but one of them deals with the U.S. security situation and poke fun at Obama or America and its plan to keep the homeland safe. The first cartoon is by Walt Handelsman. It was published on Monday, December 7th. Handelsman is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner and draws for the New Orleans Advocate. The cartoon portrays Uncle Sam locking his door. On the door are 7 locks. The door reads USA. As he's locking the final lock, Uncle Sam says to himself in the balloon, "This'll keep me safe." All the time behind him, already in the room, is a dark figure with a machine gun, and he's pointing the machine gun at Uncle Sam. The humor is, of course, also very sad. As hard as the U.S. tries to keep terror out, the reality is that there are plenty of dangerous people already here. And in this case, the case of the terror in San Bernardino, California, the wife Malik legally came into the country. They were here. The husband, Saeed Farouk, was born here in the United States. The second cartoon is by Dana Summers, also published in the Tribune, also on December 7th. There are 2 frames in the cartoon. The first frame has Obama saying, "If you see something, say something." He wants people to get involved and help keep America safe. The second frame has machine guns, bombs, references to different guns and explosives. And here the president says, terrorism, possibly, but, well, This is, of course, a play on the president's reluctance to call terror terror. There were tens of cartoons on this very topic. The next cartoon is by Chan Lo. It was published in November. The cartoon is entitled ISIS's Other Victims. And there is a Muslim family, a father and a mother with 2 children portrayed. They are carrying a sign which says, "Innocent Muslims." The cartoon is very true. Who are the people most hurt by ISIS and terror? Innocent Muslims. They're the victims in Syria and in Iraq, as well as all over the world, by the scourge that Islamic terror has created. This last cartoon is from February 2015. It was very appropriate, even many months later. That is the beauty of great humor and great criticism. This cartoon is drawn by Paul Combs. Obama's on the basketball court in red, white, and blue, a uniform with stars on it. On the court, there's also two ISIS players. The ISIS players are actually reading from a playbook, U.S. timetable and strategy book. Obama then says, "As you can see, I have a perfect plan to defeat you." This is funny. Sharing the plan, the playbook, the military plan with the enemy. They know exactly what the U.S. is planning. This takes away any element of surprise and shows all the moves. These cartoons have a shelf life. They'll last for a long time. They'll be funny and appropriate for months in the future. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. OPEC met, and there were fireworks. The conflict was between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Many issues are at stake. The most important issue is who sets the tone and who is the leader. It's all about power. OPEC is responsible for 1/3 of the world's oil, and they have tried to control the price of oil by controlling the supply of oil. Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of oil by far in OPEC, pumping 10 million barrels per day. Iran is trying to reemerge as an oil-producing power, and they're producing 1 million barrels of oil per day now. But oil has dropped below $37 a barrel, and OPEC is considering limiting production. That could be dangerous. Iran wants to limit the oil because it wants to drive up prices. But if only it was as simple as that ubiquitous supply and demand graph we learned in Econ 101. In 1985 and 86, Saudi Arabia played with the oil supply and dropped their output from 10 million barrels per day to 2.5 million barrels per day. And that decision caused a drop in revenue that resulted in a 16-year cash crisis for Saudi Arabia and turned the oil market volatile. Now, 30 years later, Saudi Arabia is thinking of suggesting a reduction in production, but that is also what Iran wants. And given the tumultuous state of affairs between the conflicts between these two nations, that would be a gift that the Saudis probably don't want to give to Iran. In 2011, the Saudis walked out of an OPEC meeting because they wanted to increase production. Today, the Saudis are locked in conflict in Yemen. They're locked in conflict in Syria. They're locked in conflict in Bahrain, all with Iran. This is just one of the most contentious meetings OPEC probably has ever had in their 168 meeting history. Over the course of the past few meetings, the Saudis have convinced members of OPEC that playing with supply, despite falling prices, will hurt everyone. And by keeping production stable, they can hopefully predict the market better. Of course, the side benefit of keeping the supply stable is Iran cannot increase either its power or its coffers. And that is a real benefit to the Saudis. Now another conflict. The conflict between Russia and Turkey has significant ripples. For example, Russia is no longer importing fruits and vegetables from Turkey. The official reason for the ban is contamination of the imported produce. We, of course, know that the real reason is that Turkey shot down a Russian Air Force bomber. This is a huge loss for Turkey. 20% of Russian fruits and vegetables were imported from Turkey. Russia announced that they will pick up the difference by importing fruits and vegetables from Iran and Israel. This in turn will be a big boon for Israeli produce exporters. At the same time, Russians love to escape the cold winters, and they were accustomed to fleeing to Turkey. Turkish hotels and charters included very inexpensive, all-inclusive deals. No Israeli hotel can compete with the price, the service, or the standard that Turkey easily provided. Nevertheless, Israeli Hotel Association is lobbying for a huge immediate investment of government tourist advertising funds in an effort to woo this potential new tourist pool to Israel. Some Russians might be swayed to come to Israel despite the significant price difference, but most will not. Also taken off the agenda for Russian vacationers are the chartered all-inclusive trips to the Sinai. ISIS took care of that when they blew up a Russian vacation charter jet, killing 224 people. Sinai was another perfect place for Russians to vacation during the cold winters. And again, the hotels in the Sinai were luxurious and inexpensive. One night in a 5-star Jerusalem hotel is the cost of an entire week in a Sinai or Turkish hotel. But at least Israel, along with Iran, will be providing tomatoes to Russia. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know every letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical equivalent? Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, etc. Words have numerical value. Almost everyone knows that Chai equals 18. But there's special numbers also in Judaism. The Bible is based on the number 6, and 6s are the foundation of everything. 1 plus 6 is ultimate completeness. The best example of this is the 6 days of creation plus 1 day of Shabbat. The 6 days are the foundation, and the completeness comes with the 7th day. Shavuot is the same way. Our calendar, the same, all based on 6s. Today, many societies have moved to the metric system, which is based on 10, much easier to figure. But we should remember the foundation of 6. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.